Everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this live call about a model of psychology that our team at Holistic Health Educators has been really excited to learn more about. I want to see just by raise of hands, how many of you have heard of the internal family systems model of psychology or heard about self-leadership? And I'm going to explain what that is in a second. But if you're like, I'm already an expert, Amy, got my L1 certification, it's going to be a nice overview for you because we're going to start from the ground up with this explanation. I'm going to open up the chat too so I can just monitor what you guys are saying. So I'm just going to start off with a really basic introduction to this model in psychology and then share some examples and some stories. And I would love to open it up for discussion after that. So I was introduced to this model through the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which actually is our current book for the book club. If you would like to join us for the book club, The Body Keeps the Score uncovers so many layers behind explaining trauma in the human body and what actually works to reverse mood disorders instead of just all the different ways that we mask it in today's society. And so phenomenal in-depth book about that. But towards the end, around chapter 17, this model in psychology is introduced called the internal family systems. And when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that must mean how you interact with your family members. And then it talked about internal leadership. I was like, that must be how you lead your internal family members, how you lead other people. But I was very quickly surprised. This is a model that validates and gives verbiage to the many different parts inside of ourself. And so instead of just looking at us like we're one glob, we're one entity, we're one person, we actually have sub personalities. And a lot of us are like, yeah, of course, there's different parts of me, but these personalities have their own set of values, of fears, of hopes, of life purpose. And instead of, in the past, I always thought like, oh, I can have different emotions, but I didn't realize that a lot of these emotions were actually the emotions of my sub personalities. Now, I'm going to explain this with like a graphic here in just a minute. The dissociative personality disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, that is like the extreme case of something that we all have. Okay, so we all have these subpersonalities. Some people will say like different voices in your heads or different influences or different drives. Sometimes they're in conflict with each other. Sometimes they're working together. The extreme case of this would be dissociative personality disorder, where you show up as an entirely different person, like time period to time period, like a completely different person. So if we look more as like, how does this typically work with people? And I'm going to pull up an image here that's really helpful, but just to use my own words to explain it, in response to different things that happen in our life, these different parts of us may develop, and they may develop because they feel like our true self isn't doing a good enough job of protecting us, or our internal self can't protect us. And so these parts emerge to either be to be a protector, or to be a manager, or to be a emergency responder. They emerge out of us in some form to protect us, and then they tend to stay with us our whole life. And sometimes, instead of us ever having conversations with these parts and like helping them understand that not all of their reactions to things are merited at this point in our life. Like maybe that reaction was serving us when we were 6 years old and our parents were screaming at us and we had to pretend like we couldn't hear a thing as soon as someone starts to yell at us. Maybe that served us when we're 6 years old, but when you're in your marriage and now your spouse wants to talk to you and you instantly get this defense coming up of like, it's not safe for me to listen to this person, that's not going to be serving you in your marriage. So we can like look at that internal protector part of us that used to protect us as a child by getting really defensive or by shutting off whoever has anything critical to say. Because at that point, it would have been really dangerous. It would have been really, really, really hurtful as a child to let every single negative thing their parent said in. So learning how to block that was a defense mechanism that really served that child. But now that this child's an adult, it's time to learn how to peel back the layers of these defense mechanisms and learn how to have constructive conversations without feeling like someone's attacking you and instantly putting you in fight or flight mode. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So for me, it really helped to hear this talked about, like our different parts, because that is that's language we all use. Like, oh, a part of me really wants to spontaneously fly to Turkey, but another part of me is like, you're a horrible worker if you're not working 24/7 and you don't have the money for that. And so we have these different parts of us that are drawn. And instead of us just looking at these parts as all good or all bad, this model teaches us to look into ourselves. And it really does help to have, I ended up having 2 therapy sessions with this model afterwards, which was so cool. Um, the model really, like, you look inside your body, and all I'm saying is sometimes it helps to have someone who's trained in this modality to help you along this process. But the concepts, some of these can be applied right away. You look inside yourself, you can almost identify where that subpart, where that part of your body is living. Is it in your guts? Is it in your shoulders? Is it in your mind? Like, and have conversations. And you can also tell that part of you to take a deep breath and relax. So Richard G. Schwartz was the gentleman who developed this. He's a doctor. He was a family psychologist, and he called it the internal family systems because he was a family practitioner and he would see how family members interact. And he's like, that's interesting. It's really similar how our parts interact. Sometimes they work together as a team, and other times they are duking it out and they like hate each other. But at the end goal, they have one goal, and that's to like serve your inner self. Oh, I cannot wait to show you the visual for this because it's so cool. They have one goal to serve and protect your inner self, but sometimes they can be at odds with each other. And I was going to mention that Richard G. Schwartz was explaining that in his practice, when he would be talking to people about, maybe they would identify a part and want to start talking to that part. Maybe it's the part of them that gets really critical, or maybe it's the part of them that gets really defensive, or maybe it's the part of them that feels really scarce. Whatever that part of them is, sometimes they would try to talk to that, but it would seem like they would be judging that part of them so much that they couldn't even have an honest conversation. So what he would have to do is be like, hey, can you please ask the other parts of you that have a problem with criticism and have a problem with scarcity and who have a problem with whatever it is, defensiveness, can you tell them to just like step back for a minute so we can have an honest conversation with this part of you, because they're like interrupting us right now, and just tell them it's safe, just tell them to step back. We're just gonna have an honest conversation with this part of us. And he said after that, it would be like a whole different person would emerge. And the most interesting thing about that is after asking someone to set these parts aside enough, there is this true self that remains. And he has these 8 C's that he's like, after you can have these parts feel safe enough to step back of the true self, eventually you're going to have just who this person is at the core. And he identified these 8 attributes that he kept finding that all these people's true self had. And at first he's like, he would see that they were really compassionate is one of the C's, for example, or really confident. And he's like, I wonder what parent they inherited that from, or I wonder where they inherited it from. But he would ask, where did, who in your life modeled that well for you? Being compassionate, confident, caring, calm, collected, having clarity of thought. He's like, who modeled that? And like, in some cases, they felt like they had no good models. And that's when he felt like, oh, it's not that we inherit all these traits. There are traits that are part of mankind's core identity. And that was really cool to hear. And he's like, these are the 8 C's. So I'm going to pull up a model and just to show you a picture. We have this inner self that contains and harbors and manifests these eight qualities. But then we have different subparts that emerged at one point or another in our life to serve and protect us. Like you mentioned, sometimes they felt like the inner self wasn't doing a good enough job, or they just felt like they needed to stand up and do something, or the pain was too much. There was one quote that like knocked me over when I heard it. He said, oh, this came from The Body Keeps the Score. It said, it is not, it is safer for a child to hate themselves than to risk losing their caretaker by expressing anger or standing up for themselves. And so I'm going to repeat that again. Sometimes it is often easier for a child to learn to hate themselves than it is for them to risk losing their parent or their caretaker by standing up for themselves. And what that made me realize is that these protectors are not always more confident than our inner self. They're not always like, I'm here to protect that inner self, Amy, because she's not doing it. Sometimes these protectors think it's safer for us to hate ourselves or to turn in or to be submissive because standing up is too risky. And that is also like such a fascinating concept, because I have a really, really close person in my life who I explained this model to them. And she was like, I don't really think I have a protector because I was just walked on all the time as a child. She had really narcissistic family members. And I know narcissist, the word gets used like a lot these days, but I think like clinically diagnosable, like anyway, she just felt like she was just always walked on. And she's like, hey, I don't think my body ever developed a protector, but now that I'm like growing up and learning how to be more confident, I'm like, yeah, I'm learning it for myself. And I was like, no, your protector was submissive. Your protector was masking your inner confidence, because as a child, it wasn't safe for you to have a voice. You standing up for yourself always resulted in you getting more yelled at, more punished, more invalidated. And so your protector was not this like Zeus standing up to defend you. It was actually this submissive, people pleasing, maybe even lying sometimes, like to just be like, oh yeah, no, I didn't know, or like, oh, I swore I checked that 10, 20 times, it was that people pleasing that emerged. And now that she's growing up, she can start letting go of that part that used to protect her and stand more in her inner self. Now, the part of this model that is just that I am just so in love with is the amount of judgment it can help us take away from our inner self, from these parts of us. Hold on one second. In the past, maybe we would have negative reactions to things, and we would be like, wow, I'm such an angry person, or I'm such an unmanageable person, or like I can't even communicate, or I can't believe I lashed out, or I'm so frivolous with my money, I have no self-control, or like name any of your negative thoughts, guys. Okay, name any of them, and we typically look at that outcome like, oh, the outcome's bad, so that's such a negative emotion or a negative part of me. But what this model teaches us is these subparts developed out of their own sense of like of values, of virtues, of purpose. And we should learn how to like appreciate them, and ask them enough questions, and dig in, make them feel safe enough that we can actually get to the root of why they are that way. Now, if you're like, Amy, you sound crazy, like multiple personalities, blah, 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 this isn't the call for you, because like, I'm just saying it how it is. We have these parts of us, and it's really liberating to look into them and validate all these subparts, because it can help us get to the root of things. So I'm going to share this picture, and then I'm going to go into I'm going to give you some examples right after I show this. So let me know if you can see this okay. I'm trying to make this bigger. It might be like a pinch blurry, but it's still the concept. Can you guys see that okay? Just give me a thumbs up in the chat if you're capable of seeing that. Okay, good. See some thumbs up. Awesome. So you see in the middle, we have this inner self. This is the deepest and essence or center of the person. So one differentiated from these other subparts, it's called self energy, and it acts as a wise, compassionate leader able to tend and heal the systems, or heal the system of us. So these are qualities of self energy: courage, compassion, connectedness, creativity, confidence, curiosity, calmness, and clarity. Okay. And then, oh dear, I noticed that when I screenshotted this, my mute thing was on. Okay, anyway. So that's part of the self. You can find this model online if you just Google the internal family system. And then sometimes this self starts to get masked by these other parts. You have firefighters. These are protectors that spring into action whenever pain from other parts, especially the more wounded exiles, threatens to overwhelm. Firefighters act powerfully and automatically to repress emerging exiles, release pressure, get out of danger fast. They can overpower the manager's efforts to control the system. This is kind of like when all else fails. These are their roots. I probably could have saved that one for last, actually, because that one is like when all else fails. The common firefighter behaviors and traits are substance abuse, attempting suicide, binging on food, having affairs, disassociating, distracting, self-harm, things like that. So that's more like, I probably should have ended with that, because that's more like the last resort when these other parts of us are failing. So the managers, these are the ones that we talk about the most. These are the primary parts to keep the person feeling secure by controlling people, events, and other parts. They bear huge burdens of responsibility for keeping the inner self together, and fear that relinquishing control will lead to worse outcomes. So they protect against vulnerability, pain, instability. They have never again as their motto. And so common manager behaviors are being controlling, analyzing, criticizing, judging, caretaking, being pessimistic, being super planning, and numbing. Also, I definitely forgot at the beginning of this call, I'm so sorry, to give like a disclaimer that we are talking about some really sensitive topics today. So if at any point this doesn't feel like emotionally safe for you to listen to, just know it's totally okay if you disengage from the Zoom call at any point. And if you know people you feel safe to talking about these types of things, please contact them. If you would like some references or referrals, I definitely have friends who are therapists trained in this type of thing who would love to continue talking about it with you. But I do apologize if any of this is triggering. And I did forget to mention that in the beginning, but I'm gonna continue now. But I just hope you know you have my support. So then we have these exiles, and these parts have been rejected or traumatized, holding deep wounds and memories filled with terror, pain, or shame. Young and childlike, these are frozen in time, hiding for protection, and they become increasingly desperate to share their story. They leave the person feeling exposed and vulnerable, something the protectors fear will destabilize the system, but they're screaming, "Don't forget me." And that's their motto. And so common exile behaviors and traits are sensitivity, anger, dependency, innocence, spontaneity, and openness. Wow, is any of this starting to like be like, wow, I really identify some of these behaviors? Because if you look at like, just look at yourself, and I think sometimes we feel the need to like either process things or defend ourselves in a way that's not necessarily true to who we are deep down, but like for some reason we just feel the need to do that, like, oh, I have to do this, or I need to, all right. And a lot of times we actually don't consciously recognize this. Like I would guess over 99% of this actually happens subconsciously, but after we become more aware of it, it's really easy to see like, wow, if I've met someone who has been traumatized and but their story was like never validated, that could either manifest in the need for them to tell their story to everyone, or for them to bury it deep down and then feel like no one believes their story, and then address everyone else in their life with the attitude of, they're not going to believe anything I say, so I might as well be hyper defensive or have this big wall up or whatever. Like it can manifest in different ways for different people, but this is the general model. And all of these, the point to get at is that all these subpersonalities that emerge are all here to protect ourselves. So when we have conversations with these subpersonalities, the end goal is to help appease their fears, to address your subpersonality's inner child, to address your subpersonality's values and belief systems. So I'm going to get into a couple examples, and then we will go ahead and start opening this up to discussion. I've been talking for 20 minutes straight, so if any of you guys are getting tired of this, you only have a few more minutes to go. And I need to close the shade. The sun is rising over the Makaha Valley Mountains, everyone. Please give me one moment. Okay, awesome. So I want to give a couple examples of, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to give you a couple examples of some things that came up in my sessions, and then some things that other people mentioned, just to give you an example of how to wrap your mind around. So how many of you have ever experienced this feeling where you have like you feel like you have a deep need to be working? You're like, I need to be working right now, while simultaneously feeling extreme resistance towards whatever that thing is that you need to do, where you're like, I need to clean my closet, or I need to be at my desk working, or I need to create that invoice and get it sent, or I need to make the estimate, whatever it is. And then like at the same time, you're like, what do I have to do? No, I have to make a fresh papaya salad. And you want to go hiking today? That I think I can fit that in. And then like everything else comes up in your day. and you can't address that thing. So this was the very first thing that came up in my therapy session, was this dual push and pull related to work. Because at one point, my job it got me in fight or flight mode. It was like a lion was chasing me. It was for whatever causes, I'm positive this happened during the pandemic, when like all these variables changed in the company, and something happened in the company that just got me in fight or flight mode anytime I like thought about working. But on the other hand, I had this like deep part of me that was like, I need to be working and I want to be working and I have so many things to do. And so we get these parts that start duking it out, because one part of you is saying it's not safe to go to work. Like, it's not safe to do that task for whatever reason. However, it gets you in fight or flight mode, you have this part that's saying it's not safe, and it's trying to keep you safe by keeping you away from it because it doesn't want you to get eaten by the tiger. But then you have this other part, and this could even be like multiple parts. You could have another part that's like the responsibility, like, oh, I want to be like managing this. We need to go to work and we need to get things done because I like to be in control of everything. So you have your manager that's like, we really need to show up at work. And you probably have some of your inner self that's like, yeah, I like being productive. I like contributing to society. I like being organized and confident and calm and clear. I want to do these things. But now all of a sudden you have this like hogwash, and who's going to be dominating? And a lot of times this is what causes this resistance, is like, instead of us just being like, oh gosh, I hate myself for wanting to go to work and never doing it and resisting this task, now we can turn and look at that part of us that is severely resisting that task and ask, why is this so scary? What is this risking to you or to the stability of our inner child? For some people, like with the closet, I know it's a really common example, but like, what if the closet has things inside of it that person just doesn't even want to look at? They don't want to have to process that, whether it was related to a past relationship or a past life or whatever it is. It doesn't feel safe to address that thing. And so they feel like this intense, like fight or flight protection mode to avoid it. So now it just opens up the door where we can look at it and have this conversation. And I was able to look at that part, that manager. No, it was probably I don't know what part of me that was. Most of them are managers, but I was able to look at that part of me that was so deeply resisting work and have a conversation and say, it's not do or die anymore, ladies and gentlemen. Like, we can breathe. Like, I realized how long I was living in fight or flight mode after the initial, like the actual fight or flight period, where I like really was feeling like I was going to be eaten by a tiger. And it made me realize, like, how often do we get trapped in feelings of trauma where we enter fight or flight mode, and then long after the threat is gone, we have the same mental and physiological responses to these triggers for as long, it could be our whole life if it never gets addressed. I mean, we see this, like, I'll give you another example. For any of you, this is like a more modern example because you guys like weren't, a lot of you didn't grow up like texting your boyfriends, but being ghosted is like when someone just randomly disappears from your life. And it's very traumatizing because it's like it's abandonment. That's like one of the most scary emotions that humans can feel. And after I was ghosted by this gentleman I dated a couple summers ago, every time my message was undelivered to someone, it could be my coworker, my mom, my sister, a friend, an old roommate, whoever, anytime my message, I would watch my message, anytime it wasn't delivered, my whole body would get tense. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, did I do something wrong? Do they hate me? What did I do wrong? The message not being delivered. They must have blocked me. That lasted for months. Is that a real fear? Is that a grounded fear? That's not a grounded fear. Like, that is like, one guy did this to me, and now I'm looking at every single text message I ever send, like, this person's about to block me. And I went to therapy for that, because I was like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life with this fear that everyone's going to turn their back on me. And so it wasn't until I addressed that, I was like, oh, this isn't necessary. People aren't going to abandon you, Amy. This was just a one scenario thing. All of a sudden, it was safe for that manager to step back and to not instantly be like thinking that this is what was going to be happening. So that was my first example with work, is I was able to look at that part of me, that manager, or I can't remember if he called it a manager or what, but that part of me that resisted work, and have an honest conversation with it and assure it that I was not being actively chased by a tiger, and it was okay for me to feel no resistance towards my job. And that was a game changer for me. So much more joy came back into my work, and like I'm not trying to say I wasn't joyful, but seriously, some of these like residual emotions can just unnecessarily burden us. That's why it's called the burdened internal and family system, because or these burdened parts, because they carry burdens that they don't always need to carry. So that was my first example. My second example is kind of funny. And then yeah, and then we'll open it up because I would love to hear your questions. Oh, wait, I have a feeling like there's something that still needs to be said about that last topic of resistance versus drive. I guess what I would say is it's in my experience with the therapies, I'm like usually wrong like 95% of the time when I guess why something is the way it is. I don't mean to be invalidating myself. I shouldn't say 95% of the time, but like it really helps sometimes to have someone help you through this process of identifying what your core beliefs even are, because a lot of times we don't want to admit. Like a lot of times we don't want to admit them because even admitting them feels like threatening. But like this really takes the shame away from having like limiting belief systems, and like opens up the door to like owning them and working with them, and then ultimately appeasing them. So yeah, I'm not trying to say we can never do therapy successfully on ourselves, because we absolutely can. That's like very empowering. But really, like if you know anyone who does like emotion code or internal family systems or dialectical behavior therapy, or whoever your friends are who practice therapy and shamanism and all that, sometimes it can really help to have someone else guide you through this process. I guess that's all I'll say. Okay, I'm gonna move on now. And if you can figure it out on your own, that's awesome. I'm just saying it's really helpful sometimes to have other people like help identify things that are running in your subconscious mind that you might not ever get to the bottom of on your own. Because I've been really surprised at what's come up with me. So, okay. The other, my next example I want to give is, it's really funny to me, but I like, so I started off this therapy session with this guy, and I thought I knew what the session was going to be about, but he also practices emotion code. So he like asked my body what's like the most important thing to release at the time. And apparently what was on my agenda was not on my body's agenda. So he's like, can you go ahead and ask your analytical mind for me? Like, if there's anything it wants to talk about. I was like, I usually don't adjust my analytical side, but sure. So I like sit in my space, and it just came up that like there was some conflict between, this may be another thing, raise your hand if you've ever gone through this, some conflict between how I envisioned me executing my financial and budgeting plan and how I was actually executing my financial and budgeting plan. And I was like, yeah, there's some incongruence there that my body probably wants, that I want to talk about, And so we started getting into it. And I joked with him that I have this like rare genetic trait inherited from my parents that like causes me to deeply believe anytime me or my parents go into a farmer's market that we're like single-handedly responsible for keeping the farmer's market economies in every community we live in afloat. It's like, I love supporting farmers markets. And like, I just told him, I was like, there's a part of me that's just spendy, like, I was like, I don't know, it's something we should look into. And he's like, okay, so you have a spendiness. He's like, let's look into it. And so I forget what questions he all asked, but it came up. Like one thing was like, he was getting that my spendiness was actually part of a defense mechanism. And he asked another question about like, what is it, or it could be a front of me trying to not be something. And I was like, I said, oh, like it just came out of me. It was like, I hate tightwads. He's like, what are you trying to not be? And I was like, I hate tightwads. And it was really, I was surprised I said that, because like, I don't really feel like a lot of hatred in my day-to-day life, but something in me just had this like strong feeling against tightwads. He's like, okay, let's look into this tightwad, the feelings you have towards tightwads. And for those of you who don't know what tightwad means, it's like people who are really, really tight with their money. And when it came time to look into it, I actually had a problem with tightwads for two different reasons. I had my like altruistic side of me that was like believes in, I love the chat, like support small businesses, validate other people's efforts, and also it just makes you so happy. Like these are great products. And so there's like this part of me that just like loves community business and loves supporting other people and loves getting what I get in return from it. And there was a part of me that judged that tightwad for like, how can you not get the bigger picture and step outside your own little bubble, buddy? Like, come on, this is a community, like support, like that wanted this altruistic side of him to not be so tight. But I had an other part of me that was responsible, that hated the tightwad out of jealousy, that they felt that much self-control. So I have like one part of me that's like deeply jealous of their ability to just control their money, and then this other part of me that's like, could you loosen up, buddy? Like the show's not like just hoping that they would like get the bigger picture and like participate in society. And so we further looked into this and into like this spendy part of me, and he's like, what's the personality type? Like, where does the spendiness part live in your body? What do they talk like? What's the voice like? And of course, at first I picture this fabulous shopper with all these bags, but then I kind of kept looking at it, and there was some inner child to that spender. It was almost like a defense mechanism. And so I'm not going to get into everything about it. Some stuff would, I mean, I'm not going to get into everything about it. But all of a sudden it removed this, it made it more complex in a good way for me. It removed this judgment I had towards my inner spendy self of just being like, Amy, you're so spendy and you have just no self-control. And all of a sudden I started asking these parts of me, like, why do you feel the need? Now, farmers markets are one thing. I'm never going to stop spending money at farmers markets. Okay. Like that's like do or die, bury me in a bed of chard and the little Kima bites. I see you on here, culinary fitness model. your Kima bites are like the best thing on planet Earth. And so like just bury me in a farmer's market basket full of goods from the local area and I'll be super happy. But there's another part of me that like really needed to learn that it was actually safe for me. It was actually safe for me to like be financially responsible. And it was safe for me to know that I'm still going to be taken care of if I execute my budget how I want to. Like there was the part of me that was being so spendy wasn't because I was just being stupid and frivolous. There was a part of me that almost looked at it like it wasn't safe for me to do that. And like I said, I'm not going to get into that right now, but this is how I want you to start looking at your inner parts is instead of judging them, ask, why do they feel unsafe to comply with your goals? Why is that threatening? Like, why does that make what feels unsafe about that? And from that place of realizing this inner part of you is there to serve you and protect you, we can all of a sudden start to get to the bottom of things without just calling that whole part of you good or bad. Woo! Okay. Man, that was a lot. Who's liking this so far? Who's thinking this is interesting? You're like getting something valuable out of it, whether for yourself or for your clients. I hope so. I can't believe how fast this came up in my work with clients because they started like this so self-hatred thing, man. Like we get into that so fast. And I was working with one friend who was also experiencing this like duking out of these different inner parts, and she just felt so much conflict. And I was able to give her verbiage to her inner conflict. I was like, hey, you're feeling inner conflict because you have these sub parts of you that are actually fighting right now. So it's not just that you're going crazy. Like you have one part of you that has this value and belief system and another part of you that has these values and belief systems. And then you have your inner self, and all three of them could be in either in cahoots with each other or fighting each other. And so all of a sudden having that language for it is it's so much more productive than just being mad at us for like feeling conflict or feeling incongruent or feeling like you make decisions that conflict each other sometimes. Woo! Okay, good. I love seeing those chats. People are feeling it. Very interesting. Good. Explains a lot. Well, thank you so much for joining me for my explanation of this model. I cannot wait to continue studying it because it's like this, the biggest word that keeps coming up is it's so like validating and so non-judgmental of how we look at ourselves. Like I really want you to think like all of these behaviors about yourself that you love and hate, even the ones that you hate about yourself or you're frustrated about yourself, that part existed at one point or another or emerged at one point or another to serve you and to love you. And that part of you has its own front and its own inner child. It has its own defense mechanisms. And sometimes it won't even listen to you trying to be critical because it's so scared of being critical that it's going to take a while for it to soften up to your inner voice So just like address these things with grace and with gratitude and with compassion, because they emerge to help you. I want to read what Lamont said. Any modality that helps us use a language to unravel our maps of thinking that holds us back excites me to no end. Oh, that's awesome. Lamont is a phenomenal practitioner of neurolinguistic programming. Lamont, you were the first person who ever introduced me to thought patterns putting us in fight or flight, or thrive and rest and digest and exhilaration. And that training you provided was such a game changer for me. I started noticing which of my decisions were made out of a place of fear and trying to avoid something and avoid a tiger and fight or flight, or even avoiding guilt and shame. Like these can be small things. It can be small decisions like, oh, I shouldn't stay at home and turn down the party because I don't want to be the bad auntie or the bad grandma. That's a decision that's made out of fight or flight. That's not made out of love, thrive, rest, and digest. Okay. So Lamont was the first one who ever introduced me to start paying attention to where my decisions were coming from. Are they coming because I want something? I feel exhilarated. I want to participate, or are they coming because I'm trying to run away from something? And this can go both ways on every level, like wanting to leave a relationship, wanting to stay in a relationship, wanting to spend money, not spend money. Those can be from total joy and forward movement or total fear mode. So thank you, Lamont, for tripping up and for joining us today, because I love what you practice and what you do. So thank you again for your work. Okay, so Debbie, Jade, Nadia, anyone who's on here right now, do you have any good questions for discussions or anything you would like to share about what's been presented so far? And it actually can be anyone. It does not need to just be the people that I called out. Put this on gallery view. Ooh, okay. Gail talked a little bit. She said, you talked a little bit about procrastination. Any more ideas? Wow, this is a great topic. This is a great conversation topic. So procrastination, I'm going to put this in like two categories, because I do think there is such thing as just like, they call them frogs. I forget what that stands for. But like frogs are things that we just like are deeply avoiding because it's going to be uncomfortable in some way or another. And I don't know if there's like any amount of therapy that can completely remove the discomfort that's just associated with certain tasks. So at some point we just have to wake up and eat the frog. That's what they call it. Someone tell me where I got that idea from. It's in all these business books about waking up and eating the frog. Like just like take the task you're putting off and stop waiting for it to get comfortable one day and just like do it. So that's one line of, that's like one level of why we might be procrastinating something. The other one is this much deeper one that we're talking about, where you have deep resistance towards something that is causing your body to like really deeply believe it's not safe for you to participate in that yet. And I don't care how small of a task it is, because like sometimes we think that like things just need to be like so obviously horrifically traumatizing in us for understand why we might have a physiological response to it. But these can be little things. And so evaluating, and I would love other people to perk up here too. But when it comes to looking at what we're deeply putting off, having that conversation about it. There was one thing that I heard from a pastor one time. He said that what like the largest source of pain isn't the events that happen to us, it's the way that those events threaten the way we want to see ourselves. That's what's the most deeply scary thing to us. He gave the example of a breakup. He's like, sometimes we look at a breakup like it's just so crushing and it feels horrible, and we either really don't want it to happen, or it happens and then we get sucked right back into the same relationship. And he's like, a lot of times the pain isn't losing that person. Like you probably broke up because it was a good idea to break up and your life paths aren't compatible, and it's great, you can be grateful for what happened, great. You got to learn a lot from each other and it's time to split ways. So a lot of times that pain of breaking up isn't just that you're like mortified that you're like that you're not going to be able to live without this person and they're the most important person in your entire life and they're meant to be your soulmate forever and ever. A lot of times the pain of a breakup is that you wanted to believe you were attractive and beautiful and valued, and now that breakup is threatening those things. It's threatening how wanted, wantable, how beautiful, how attractive, how intelligent, your inner core. It's threatening those things. I've definitely seen this lately with some friends going through relationship things. Like, holy cow, people, after I've started learning more about mental health, I can tell you within like 5 seconds whether I think someone should be in a relationship or not, depending on how they talk about their relationship and how they talk about their breakup. I was just talking to this one guy. He's like, I'm like, you still dating her? He's like, yeah, we're having like our evaluation at like our year mark, you know? And I'm like, so like, how are you feeling about things? He's like, I mean, it's good. He's like, I just can't imagine what it would be like to be single again, though. And I'm like, bruh, you are like, are you in a relationship right now because you would rather not be single than be with this girl? Because that's what it sounds like, you know? It's like hearing for him the threat of like being single and navigating that whole thing was like too scary for him, that like he would rather be in a relationship that was like less fulfilling than he may want or that he can have. It was like less scary for him to be in a potentially like imperfect, no, all of our relationships are going to be imperfect, but like an potentially like not right relationship, just because he didn't want to feel whatever being single threatens to him. So this concept is revolutionary because it really like flips things and makes us look at ourselves and what are the things that feel threatening to us. Not just, is it scary because it's going to be painful to do it or because I'm going to lose something. It's, is it scary because of what it could mean about me and I'm avoiding it? Does looking in my closet mean that I am a disorganized person who runs away from my past and tries to keep everything hidden deep down? You know, is it that cleaning out the closet is going to be boring and like tedious and make you look at old bills from 25 years ago? Or is it that it's going to uncover some things and that's going to threaten your core identity? So anyway, that could be totally offline of what you're looking to hear, but that's just what came to mind for me, is like looking at how things alter the way we view ourselves, and then from that place of like asking like, why does this feel threatening, and are those fears validated? Lamont said, I've often helped them give each of these personalities a name to make it fun and memorable. Oh, cool. Jan, Julie, Mark, Frank, Tarzan. This also helps them talk it through themselves later. Yes, Lamont, that's awesome. Oh my gosh, Lamont, I forgot half of my presentation today. It's not half, but internal leadership or self-leadership is the act of your inner self leading and managing these sub-personalities and talking to them and like literally being a man and like and like leading them, just like managing them. I'm so happy you mentioned that, Lamont, because after you like understand them better, then when it's time for self-leadership, which is like, holy cow, I never ever thought there was such thing as leading your inner parts of yourself, but that totally makes sense. Next time I'm like speaking at a business conference and they're like, Amy, will you go speak at a business conference? Yeah, I'll talk about self-leadership or internal leadership. And they're going to think I'm talking about like internal, like corporate panel leadership. And I'm gonna be like, you guys all have sub personalities that are manifesting in your life in unfulfilling ways. And we're going to talk about how to lead them. Okay. That's totally what it's going to be about. I'm so excited. But it is this internal leadership of how well do you address your managers and like validate them, be like, hey buddy, I really appreciate you stepping up to the bat right now, but actually things are not as dangerous as they appear. We don't need to be freaking out, you know, or like whatever it is, addressing these internal parts of us and having conversations. And this is what Karen's not on the call. She really wanted to be on the call because after she heard about this model, after she had already started practicing some of this, because she couldn't fall asleep at night. She had really, really, really bad restlessness. And she said that she just started talking to herself and being like, self, like, it's okay. And she would just like talk to these parts of her mind and just put them at ease and be like, we can go to bed now. We really can. We can just go to bed. It's all okay. So she was practicing self-leadership, talking to herself. We've all heard that concept, like talk to yourself, but really like put these people's fears at ease and lead your inner self and help. The best part about this, you guys, is that little graph I was showing you with these parts that emerge. The best part about this is the more those shrink, the bigger the self becomes. Do you see that? Do you see how the more these firefighters and managers and exiles, the more that they get less center stage, not that they're bad, but they don't always need to be, they don't need to be in the leadership position. Ourself needs to be in the leadership position. So the more that those can step aside and realize like, oh, they don't need to be leading right now, the more that inner self emerges. And that's like what therapy is all about, is like putting your inner self back in the driver's seat of your relationships, of your decisions, of your thought patterns throughout the day, until eventually like your inner self that's calm and courageous and collected and confident is now making the majority of your decisions and reactions. So I just think that's such a beautiful, hold on one second. I just think that is such a beautiful way to look at it. So I'm just going to read this real quick. Oh, okay, awesome. So another thing about procrastination, Nadia said sometimes it has to do with our perfectionism, low self-esteem, or negative self-belief. Nadia, I would actually love it if you felt so inclined to perk up about that. Don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I just find I do emotion code and body code, and I find that all of those are pretty big components to sometimes procrastinating, putting things off. What's another one? Creative insecurity is like a huge one. It's funny, even people who are super creative, sometimes they don't attack other parts that are not as creative because of that. So yeah, I just find.
So how do you help them manage or personally manage the part of you that has perfectionism and it doesn't want to address this task because it's never going to be good enough, or who has low self-esteem and doesn't feel like you have the confidence to do it, or whatever these beliefs is? How do you go about, is validating that that's it simply enough, or do you have like conversations, or what's that process usually like?
It's interesting because will I muscle test for people on the emotion code, and as soon as I say something, I'd say 90% of the time, something pops in their mind and they're like, oh my gosh, like I never thought of that. Like when I was in sixth grade, or, like some weird thing, you're like, how did that even happen? And so, but with the emotion code, you just kind of, you say it and you release it. So it's not really talk therapy, but I do find if I'm working with someone in person and I say it, they're like, oh my gosh, that totally makes sense. And then it just, something pops right in their head.
Yes. Honestly, like I feel like even just like identifying it is like the majority of what causes this like behavior change, which is like, oh, that's what was causing that. And I don't even know how it happens so fast, but I've like talked to people who are like, I'm not ready for therapy because I'm not ready to like try to make goals and change and like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that therapy is like the most effortless form of behavior change you could ever go through, because it's going to shift your core belief, your core identity, and behavior change is like basically effortless after that, because now all of a sudden this belief system's shifted, and then all of a sudden it's just like way easier to be incongruent with that. So I love that. Yeah, just you mentioned just sometimes just like identifying it is enough, and just like realizing like what, like connecting the dots for them. That's so cool. Thank you, Nadia. Anything else you want to share about that?
I don't think so. I loved your talk.
Oh, cool. Thank you. But yeah, thank you for perking up. That was awesome. There was one comment up here really quick. So simply talking it out with yourself is a suggested solution. Amanda, that is a suggested solution, is self-leadership, like learning how to talk to these different parts of yourself, because sometimes those managers or firefighters or exiles start to take front and center stage. And like I already mentioned, at some point in your life that probably was serving you, but if it's not serving you anymore, it's time to address those parts and be the leader. So that is one method, Amanda, but you're asking the wrong person, because like my life cause is to like get everyone in front of a therapist. So you're asking the wrong person, because I'm always going to be like, do you know anyone who practices emotion code or any type of emotional therapy? Because you should go work with them. But self-talk is a huge part of it, so that'll help a lot. Okay, awesome. Yes, awesome. So Lanita said, I have names for the other parts of me and we talk often. That's so fun. Yeah, it's just good to identify it. So thanks, Lanita, for your comment. That was great. Okay, anything else on the related to procrastination or limiting belief systems? I don't know if Lamont, you want to perk up at all, or anyone else who has anything to mention for how you've helped clients over or yourself overcome that resistance or procrastination.
I'd be happy to tune in.
Yay, thank you, Lamont.
Well, so procrastination is an interesting thing because I guess I'll turn my video on too. it's an interesting thing because did we really procrastinate something? Or did we just in the moment reorganize our priorities?
Mm.
So if we did something different, than what we had planned or what we had expected, then aren't we still just kind of stuck in accusing ourselves and thinking that we're a victim to our own self?
Yeah.
More so than we actually procrastinated anything?
Yeah.
Like, because if we get after ourselves, because that's just a method that we're going to use against ourselves,
Uh-huh.
is feeling like, oh no, I didn't get these things done. I procrastinated, right?
Yeah.
But that concept of procrastination is really just like a victimizing of yourself. But really you just chose something different. And now you're just getting after yourself for that choice. You're like, oh, I'm upset with myself because I procrastinated. Instead of finding congruency between what you decided and why you decided it within yourself so that you could choose if you want to change it or not, which
That's awesome. We're talking about removing judgment. That's
Yeah.
that's like, oh yeah, I reprioritized. Like that doesn't make me a bad person. Like I probably reprioritized for a reason.
Yeah, but we're oversimplifying. One of the biggest concepts I really emphasize over and over and over is our tendency to oversimplify so that we can stay in our old pattern, really. Like get upset with ourselves, be disappointed, think that, because really it's just a method. This concept that we use against ourselves, where we say we procrastinated, is just a method to stick with our addiction that we are unsuccessful or not capable, or it's just a big oversimplification that we're using as a method to fix it. Like, so as a method, we're saying, oh, I did it again. I procrastinated. Darn it. That's our version of trying to change it. But it tends to not work very well because we're really just getting after ourselves for something that we chose something else instead of focusing on the thing we chose and going, hey, I got that.
Yeah.
I got that out of today. I got that out of life. I got, as a father, if I spend my time doing all these different things and I have all these plans and something comes up and maybe it's with my kids or my wife and I want to spend some time with that and I spend that time with them. And then at the end of the day, I look at my list and I go, oh, I didn't do it. And I procrastinated. Instead of saying, man, I did all these things. I've had those priorities in the way that I did. And look at all the things I did do. Yeah, sweet. I'm so glad I procrastinated. I'm on fire. I'm going after it tomorrow. And get those kind of, what we call our negative feelings out of the way so that we're just excited the next day to go after the things we didn't get done.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
That's so awesome. I love that.
Yeah, I love this stuff. It's so fun. I love this conversation, the stuff you're bringing up about these different parts of us. Because, sometimes I use it as an actual personality, say there's a, kind of a personality here, or sometimes I just say it's a part of you.
Yeah.
A part of you this. People say, no, I don't that. And I said, but does a part of you do that?
Uh-huh.
And like, oh, actually, yeah, maybe a part of me does still do that. Right? Because we come to these hard conclusions about ourselves that just hold us back. It's just not helping us. And so when people give me these hard conclusions, I find ways to challenge that. So I say, now maybe does a part of you still do this? Does a part of you still think? And they're like, oh yeah, part of me does. And then if you can give it more detail around that part, and start to create a personality, a sub-personality that they call it, then they can start using that to get out of that stuck part of just thinking things are a certain way and it's oversimplified and it's super simple and easy.
That's so interesting. I was just telling someone about one of the biggest things I got from learning at your program was how we get addicted to our thoughts. So we always hear about sugar addictions and addictions to other things, but we get addicted to certain thought patterns, and not because they're always good and result in dopamine and high self-esteem. Sometimes they can result in a negative concoction of like neurotransmitters and emotions, but we still get addicted to those chemical reactions and to that brain map and that neural pathway. And I was explaining this, I was like, yeah, you can get addicted to negative thought patterns, and it can like wire your brain to frame everything in a negative way. And that's like how, that's totally what you're talking about right now. It's like, okay, so I wake up, I reprioritize because like, oh, cool, my friend flew into town or whatever it is, what if for whatever reason we reprioritize, and that would be like a totally normal thing. And now I'm like choosing to judge myself. So yeah, I love
and
that.
I use the example of where I did something that I would consider to be still a good thing, right? In my definition, a good thing. But there's also things that we decide to do that we later decide was not a good thing. We binge watched Netflix or whatever. But instead of looking back and going, oh man, I shouldn't have done that, that was such a mess, look back and say, how fun was that?
Yeah.
How incredible was that? I just basked my brain in someone else's story and life and everything, and I just loved it. And yeah, I didn't get all these other things done, but I did do that. And that's what that was a blast.
Yeah.
That was super fun. If we get off of the downside of everything, getting after ourselves and the patterns that we get in, that is trying to solve something. Our brain's always trying to solve something. Always. Every action it takes is to solve something. And so whenever we question our behavior, we think, what am I trying to solve? What is my brain trying to solve in this way of addressing it? To look back and go, oh, I procrastinate so much. I'm always procrastinating. I'm a procrastinator. I don't get it done. No, you're not. You're a self-sabotaging person who's trying to solve through feeling down and negative and bad about yourself or whatever, and oversimplifying your situation and your thing in this moment. In that moment, when you're watching Netflix, you're having a blast. You're having fun. You're enjoying it. You're absorbing whatever it was. But then when you put yourself in that place, you can start to really analyze, did it lead me to things I truly wanted? What was I? And I can be okay with having that conversation with myself and figuring it out, because I'm not, it's not detrimental either way. It's going to work out. Everything's, we're going to get there. It's faster, slower.
Because a part of them may have like really wanted the relief, or the enjoyment, or just the breath of it. It's like watching a show and like living in someone else's world for a minute, and then there could be another part that was resisting things. But I just love what you're saying. It's just like it doesn't have to be so like, what's wrong with me all the time. It can be more like, oh, this is what happened. Like, that was enjoyable. Like, what do I want to do now? That's going to lead me towards what I actually want, but I'm not going to judge that because that was a good time,
Yeah, I like that. I think we all think like mechanics. My father was a mechanic, and I learned mechanics. And when you look at a problem in a car, you're always focused on the problem. It's like you have to figure out, is it the brakes? Is it the solenoid? Is it whatever, you're always focused on the problem. But in our brain, that does not benefit us. Always be focused on the problem.
Yeah.
But
what if you had
a hard pill to swallow?
What if you had a mechanic that popped your hood and they're like, your radiator is like totally working right now. Like your gears are shifting without a problem. Like, that's awesome. It was like, I love that analogy, because like we do tend to have that mechanic, like what's not firing properly, when there could be like 900 things that are firing properly, and we're just like hyper focused on like what's going wrong. So I love that.
If we were constantly in danger of losing our life, then that's what we'd want to do. Right? That's what would work. But we're not. We never are. We almost never.
Yeah.
This is fun. I love this stuff. This was awesome. I loved it.
Thank you, Lamont. I'm so glad you perked up. That was awesome. I love everything you teach. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Really appreciate it. Also, I don't know who can't just like laugh when Lamont laughs. He laughs, and I was like, I just want to laugh. I'm like, yeah, it's like way less. This is like way less stressful than I think it is. So, thank you, Lamont, for that. But yay, awesome! I'm loving these comments. Just that it's making so much sense. So good to hear others explaining what you're always trying to understand within yourself. Totally, that's totally how I feel. So I'm really happy to hear there's been a good response to this topic today. It's so relevant to all of us. So we are here at the hour-long mark. So I'll just open this up one last time for questions or comments or contributions, and then we'll wrap up today's call. Okay, so someone asked about tapping. I am happy to talk about tapping if there's someone else who's like has a little corner market on tapping. Please go ahead and chat here. But tapping's been really successful in my family. My little sisters use it for anxiety. I've used it to rewire mental patterns that I noticed weren't serving me anymore and just walk myself through things. I love the deep breathing. There is a form of tapping where if you're trying to reduce a traumatic response and you don't actually like want to talk through the trauma because that would just re-traumatize you, you can tap without having to even talk to yourself. And that's not called the emotional freedom technique. That's called the I forget what it's called. But I'm just saying there's a form of tapping where you don't need to be talking, but I do typically talk, and I just tap on these meridian points in the body and breathe deep and just talk myself through things. And that would be a great way to talk to those inner parts of you, but really awesome way to like rewire those mental thought patterns. So if you want to look more into that, look up emotional freedom technique. There's a lot of great like short videos and charts about it. But I feel calmer already. Wow. But yeah, tapping's a phenomenal tool to have in your toolbox. That is something you can do from home or from anywhere. Super congruent with everything we've talked about. So great question. All right, any last things? I just have so much gratitude for everyone who joined us today. This has been such a beautiful and fulfilling call. And it's really exciting to see what we're learning about psychology and about neuroscience and about childhood development. And we're learning so much about how the brain's wired and how it affects us. We're going to keep on learning, but it's a really exciting time to be alive. A really exciting time to be alive. So thank you. And thank you, Melissa, and everyone who joined us today. I'm just throwing it out there one last time. If anyone, any last thing, or if Debbie, if you want to say a word or two. Yay, thank you, Colleen. I always say I'm like so happy I haven't had like formal training in psychology, because I've gotten to experience like probably 30 different forms of therapy as the patient, not as the professional. So I really can't wait to spend more time. I want to do like a little educational program on all the different types of therapy that are out there, just so people know what's out there. Cause like a lot of this has been out of my own curiosity. And then also it's been out of like, wow, I could probably really benefit from that. It's just so exciting to experience these things from like the other side of like not being the client, or not being the coach, the professional, but being on the receiving end and being like, that's how my brain works. Like this is what subconscious programming has been running 24/7 in the back of my mind. It's very liberating to get to the bottom of that. So anyway, so thank you so much everyone for joining us. Awesome. Please join us for our book club discussion this month. It'll be this month through next month. The Body Keeps the Score. You can use the same community call link as you're using right now. It'll be every other Monday night. So you can sign up for that on our website. But awesome. Thank you, everyone. Abigail, Renee, Teresa, Jade. Awesome. Aloha. Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm going to stop recording now.